What is up? What is up, YouTube Law and Crime Network? P. Diddy on trial. Juries see explicit evidence as trial takes dark turn. It's going to take a dark turn, y'all. Hey, y'all, hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. As soon as I find my mouse, give him a thumbs up real quick. Let's check this bad boy out, man. Hit that subscribe button, hit that bell. Let's take it from the top, baby. Let's go.
A juror was suddenly removed, explosive texts were revealed, and prosecutors attempted to paint an even darker picture of Sean Diddy Combs' inner circle. From escort logistics to alleged drug use, jurors were walked through a flood of messages that prosecutors say exposed the operation behind the accusations. We're going to break it all down with Law and Crime's in-court reporter Elizabeth Milner right now. Welcome to Sidebar, presented by Law and Crime. I'm Jesse.
Welcome to Sidebar, baby.
Hey everybody, this is another Law and Crime legal alert. So recent allegations against the multi-billion-dollar video game industry claim that video games are engineered for addiction. The harms impact.
That's funny.
Day 24 of the federal sex trafficking and racketeering trial against Sean Diddy Combs ended with more explosive developments, both inside and outside of the witness box. The surprise move by the judge to remove a seated juror drew very sharp objections from the defense, and once testimony got underway, jurors were led through this trove of texts and internal documents revealing alleged drug use, escort arrangements, disturbing behind-the-scenes behavior at the center of the government's case. So to give us that special inside look at what went down in today's proceedings, you know who I'm going to bring in. Law and Crime's in-court reporter Elizabeth Milner, who's been there for every step of the action. Elizabeth, so good to see you. So before we get into the testimony, we got to talk about this drama with a juror, juror number 6, dismissed. What happened?
Yeah, so it didn't necessarily come as a surprise that this particular juror, that being juror number 6, was dismissed. I think the judge was kind of signaling that this that this specific juror was going to be dismissed, kind of hinting about this on Friday. But then he took into consideration what the defense had to say, as they made really an impassioned speech about why this particular juror should stay. But as far as what the judge said this morning in court, he said, I understand it's important, but this amount of scrutiny is not necessary. And I think it kind of had to do with just the letter that the defense had, just kind of accusing the prosecution of dismissing this particular juror, mainly based off race and just other accusations from the defense to the government. And so as far as what the judge said, he said the inconsistencies from this specific juror raised a lot of issues. And pretty much these inconsistencies were just about where this particular juror lived. So he was registered in Bronx County. He picked up the call to serve on this jury from Bronx County. However, there was this statement that was made to a jury staff member, just kind of out of jest from this particular juror, where he had mentioned something along the lines of, the traffic from New Jersey is crazy, or I just had to travel all the way down from New Jersey, which kind of signaled to other staffers, okay, what's going on here, given that you're a juror from Bronx County, or specifically from the Bronx. And so what ended up happening is the judge brought this particular juror back in the robing room, or judge's chambers, and spoke to this juror just about what was really happening, and spoke to him about a couple of times here. So it wasn't just a one and done type of situation, Jesse. It was something that had been mulling over for a couple of days. And so the judge ended up going back and looking at the record pretty closely. So he reviewed the transcript from the robing room, but also he went back even further and looked at just some of the questions and answers from the jury selection process. So the judge said that there were inconsistencies, and clear inconsistencies, from voir dire, which is jury selection, and the robing room conversations. And the judge had serious concerns about this particular juror's candor and how the juror might have just kind of skewed his answers during the jury selection process, and even when he was having these discussions with the judge too in the robing room, and how he might have skewed his answers in order to just stay on the jury. And so the judge said this is threatening the integrity of the jury process. So the defense brought up that the juror will be placed by a white juror, and the defense was kind of really adamant that they just did not want this particular juror dismissed. And so the court took the weekend to look at the defense's argument and everything they had to say, and they didn't believe, they being the court, didn't believe that further inquiry of this jury is appropriate, and they actually said that further inquiry would be inappropriate. And so the judge said that there is nothing that the juror could say that would put the genie back in the bottle. He said this is why we have alternate jurors, precisely for this particular situation. And so the defense did ask the court to not make this decision based off race, but the court should and cannot let race be a factor. The judge saying that there was no evidence even of prosecutorial misconduct, and there was zero evidence of that too. So what ended up happening is that juror number 6 was dismissed from the case. So the jury box looks just a little bit differently going forward now, as a lot of the jurors, especially starting kind of in the back row, shifted just one seat over to, I guess, the left of the jury box. And so now we see one of the alternates becoming now an official juror. Well, they've always been a juror, right? But now they're officially going to be on the kind of jury pool to be deliberating. And so a lot of stuff happened just this morning, but I think, the writing was on the wall that the judge was ultimately leaning toward dismissing juror number 6.
And you make a good point for everybody out there. It's not like this alternate juror has been in a locked room for the past 6 weeks. They've been hearing all the same testimony as the seated jurors. Now they just will become a part of the actual deliberation process. Elizabeth, real quick, was there some issue with another juror too, but we don't have a lot of information about what's going on with that?
Yeah, so what we did learn is that the issues concerning these 2 jurors really have nothing to do with one another, but we did kind of learn a little bit, possibly more information, and that was from TMZ. So shout out to Brian Andrews and the TMZ team, because we did kind of learn that I guess this other issue with another juror had to do with a text message they received from somebody. It was from an unknown sender asking if this person was the juror that was going to be dismissed. And so there was no conversations that were had outside the presence of the jury today, as far as even any types of decisions about whether this particular juror who got the message, because the big thing is they're not supposed to be talking about this case outside. But then there's also the issue, this jury isn't sequestered. So I'm always kind of curious too whether or not they're getting a lot of information. The judge, before they're dismissed for the weekend, or even at the end of the day, is like, don't talk about this case with anyone, turn off your notifications. If you see an article about this case, turn it off, throw your phone away, go outside, those types of things. And so from right now, what we know is that there hasn't been any type of action taken on this particular juror, but the juror did feel a type of way and letting the court know that they did receive this type of message. But as far as any action, as far as dismissing the juror or questioning this juror even further, nothing has been taken today.
And I'll tell you, when we do the lunchtime show on Law and Crime's YouTube channel, I can't tell you how many questions we get was it a mistake to not sequester this jury? How can we ensure they don't follow anything about the case? I mean, at the end of the day, they should not know who you are, Elizabeth. The person who's the face of Law and Crime's coverage of this, they should not know who you are. They should not know who I am. And if they do, it's a problem. Okay. So we move past the juror issue. Now we go into summary witnesses. Summary witness is very interesting in a case like this. Basically, when you have a voluminous amount of material, particularly digital evidence, you need sometimes a witness to kind of condense it, to kind of do an overview, to summarize what it's about. You have charts that are presented by the government. So obviously in a racketeering case like this, and particularly when you have so many different players and all these underlying allegations, I'm not surprised. I want to talk about the first witness, this first summary witness. It was a paralegal, and her name is, and correct me if I mispronounce it, Anya Sanker. What was her role?
Yeah, so Anyanya Sanker, I hope I'm pronouncing it right too, Jesse. So her role essentially was just reviewing 2 of the charts that were in this case, and those being the summary charts. And so she said that the government prepared the charts, but then Sankar's role was just reviewing these charts for accuracy. And so she reviewed text messages, documents, audio messages, audio files, which were completely different, and then just other things like that. And so we saw exhibits of, text message timelines, but these ones were specifically from a person that's been brought up a number of times in this trial. However, we haven't heard from this person or directly from her mouth, and that obviously being Christina Courtroom. And so what we did learn is just about, the messages that were sent on her device, the device that was obtained by HSI during the raids. And so there were just a number of text messages from Christina Courtroom to Dave Shirley, an assistant, and then just some other messages too, including messages to Jane, messages to Cassie, messages to Sean Combs, aka Diddy, aka PD, as some messages call him himself. And so what we were able to see from this particular chart was dates and times, the record type, from whoever the sender was, and then to whoever the sender was sending that to, the content file name, and then the source of it all, which is essentially just where the government exhibit is. So that way, whenever the jury goes back to deliberate, they're able to kind of easily find everything because everything's all summed up into one chart. But we saw kind of records from The earliest time frame being March 18th of 2016 to February 26th of 2024. And I thought those dates were pretty interesting because if you think about it, February 26th of 2024 being kind of the last record that they have, I thought was like, oh, okay, because given that the raids happened in March and then Diddy's arrest didn't happen until September, I thought the dates would be a little more current than they actually were. And even going back to March 18th of 2016, that being the earliest of these particular records, that was years into Christina Quorum's role already as Diddy's kind of head assistant. And so what we did end up seeing is just some text messages. So we did see one message, this being December 29th of 2019, and it was a message from Ryan Lopez to Christina Quorum, Ryan Lopez being one of the assistants. And he said, LOL, think I saw one of the cowboys. You can spot them in the lobby like an escort. I forgot to tell you about it. Then Christina Quorum writes to Ryan Lopez, laughing emoji. By the way, how long is he going to stay awake? Then Ryan Lopez wrote back to Christina Quorum, LOL, I'm guessing until tomorrow night. Then we heard some audio files, this one being from, and they kind of jumped around, honestly, Jesse, from time frame to time frame. So we saw one audio file from January 30th of 2023, and the source was a voice memo, but it was an audio kind of recording that we had heard previously, and that was the recording from Christina Quorum talking to Jonathan Perez, one of the assistants, just about that sexually explicit video that was found on the staff iPad, where Christina Quorum kind of pulls him to the side and is like, I need to tell you, or I need you to tell me step by step and don't miss a beat, just as far as how everyone found this particular video. So it was something that we've heard before. And even some of these text messages that we saw in this particular exhibit were texts that we've seen before, which means the jury has seen it before too. There was one text exhibit. This was from March 18th of 2016 to March 20th of that same year. It was between Christina Quorum and Dave Shirley, that being the assistant, of course. And Christina Quorum is saying, can you head to the Four Seasons to set up room? He said, bring water, Gatorade, chicken noodle soup too. So interesting of kind of where they were going in this type of direction. I think what the government was trying to do was really just show just how the preparation occurs for these hotel nights. I think at points the defense was kind of insinuating that the assistants didn't know about these hotel nights, but according to some of the text messages that we saw presented by the government, it seems like everyone was kind of in the know about what these particular hotel nights, one, entailed, but also what they required too. And so you see a message from Dave Shirley that's saying, okay, is an Uber taking them still? And then, I'm kind of paraphrasing here because there were so many messages. And then he later says, Rock riding with them. And then Christina Quorum responds, no Rock, just CC and PD, presuming that PD is obviously P. Diddy and CC being Cassie Ventura, something that Cassie has even testified was kind of a nickname that she has been called too. And then, we see another message from Melissa Fiola. So this must have been one of the group messages where Melissa writes, adjourning room not available, hotel now sold out. And then we see another message, this being from the next day from Christina Quorum to Dave Shirley, again, this being in March of 2016, where Christina Quorum writes, they're giving him a hard time, something, 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 I got it added. And so I think that was just another kind of talk about just logistics in terms of who was coming to this particular room and that sort. And then we saw more text messages. June 16th of 2016, Christina Quorum writing to Dave Shirley, heads up, he's probably about to do a Wild King night. Dave Shirley said, SHIT, need to re-up on baby oil. Christina Quorum says, yeah, you can head out and get everything that you need. Dave Shirley writes, forgot to grab the cash, or he wrote like a $sign, and package from you. Then we see another message, or we see more messages. These ones from November 14th of 2021. These ones actually featuring Sean Combs himself and Christina Quorum. PD to Christina Quorum, is room ready now? Christina Quorum to PD, on with them now, any minute. We see another text message from Christina Quorum to PD, that being hotel called, Paul coming up. And we presume, given the time frame, that Paul might have been the entertainer that Jane was specifically talking about during her testimony. And so it really was just kind of a lot of text exhibits that were shown from all different time frames and time ranges, including from when Cassie was in a relationship with Sean Combs, also to when Jane was in a relationship with Sean Combs too. And then just seeing just all the different kind of complexities, I guess may be the right word to say, as just far as who was involved in what assistance and how Christina Quorum would kind of go about writing these messages to make sure that the hotel room was set up for these hotel nights or Wild King nights, or what we all call them to be Freakoffs too.
Right, and I think that that is imperative for a racketeering case where you need to prove that the inner circle was a part of it. Racketeering conspiracy. Sean Combs couldn't have engaged in this behavior or agreed to engage in this behavior by himself. He needed other people. So the more they can say he used his businesses, his assistants, his staff to facilitate these alleged crimes, these criminal events, and cover them up, that's key. And I think the more that they talk about the flow of cash to the hotels or the flow of cash to the sex workers and transporting the sex workers. And I understand there are messages about, a lot of travel arrangements too, transportation to engage in prostitution. He's facing 2 charges. And that's basically, did he transport sex workers and alleged victims for the purposes of sex work? That's what it is. When it came to Jane and when it came to Cassie, the 2 alleged victims in this case, they make up their own individual sex trafficking charges. They make up their own transportation to engage in prostitution charges. Wasn't there text messages that were about them specifically?
Yeah, there definitely were for both Cassie and Jane. So we saw messages from May 5th of 2017 where Cassie wrote to Christina Coram, WTF. Christina Coram wrote to Cassie, you okay? Cassie writes back, I don't have my stuff. I don't even have money. And then always paraphrasing here because there were just so many text messages that were shown where Christina Coram then responds to Cassie, he went right up after you left and haven't seen him since. Then there was another message. It was from the year later. It was April 20th of 2018. So this is the same year that Cassie and Diddy later called it quits in the fall of that year. But in the spring of that year, Cassie wrote to Christina Coram, hey, I'm sorry about last night. I can't do the violent, scary, kick me out of my home anymore. I got carry and bounced. I don't know what else to say. Then Christina Coram writes to Cassie, you okay? Cassie responds, I'm okay, just bummed. I don't know what's going on. Then we see messages from, jumping in time frame here where they're kind of discussing Jane's rent, and that being a message that we saw from May 16th of 2023 where Christina Coram wrote to Diddy, or PD in these particular text messages, where she wrote, FYI, Robin said she paid Jane's rent last week. Then Jane kind of even sending messages to Christina Coram herself, where on November 2nd of 2023, Jane wrote to Christina Coram, also just keeping it real with you. I'm not doing any more hard partying. We recently got into a pretty big fight and I'm putting my foot down. No more hotel nights. Then obviously Jane said a couple more things too. But that was just kind of the gist of what I was able to write down pretty quickly. And then we hear an audio file or an audio message that we've also heard before, and this being from November 19th of 2023, so just a couple of days after Cassie filed her lawsuit and just a couple of days after that lawsuit was ultimately settled, where it's again a recording that we've heard before of Diddy talking to Jane, but this one's a little bit different. It's not like a voice note that people send to one another through text messages. This was the recording of the recorded phone call that we heard during Jane's testimony, where Diddy is recording Jane and he tells her, I'm sorry you feel, or Diddy is allegedly recording Jane, I should say that, where he says, I'm sorry you feel this way. You know I can't talk on the phones. Let me know how I can make you feel better. It was some kinky stuff I thought we both enjoyed. So I think, presuming that he's talking just, either about Jane's feelings about hotel nights, or probably kind of relating it to Jane being emotional about Cassie's lawsuit. Because if you remember from Jane's testimony, she recalled that when Cassie's lawsuit had dropped, that she really felt like kind of compelled by it, given that she felt this was like her entire own experience, where she said she felt like 3 pages were literally just her own experiences written down on paper. Then there's another audio file. That same day, November 19th of 2023, Diddy's calling Jane and he's saying, I really need your friendship right now. Call me back just to make sure you're breathing. And then Jane's kind of visibly emotional, or she is, you can hear her be emotional on this particular recording where she's saying, I'm so effed up. Diddy says, you don't have to worry about nothing else. Please pray for me. I'll pray for you. And so then we see kind of some more messages between Christina Coram to PD or Diddy. Then we see a message from Jane reaching out to Christina Coram where she says, hey, I wouldn't normally involve you in anything, but he just threatened me about my sex tapes on his phone. He said he would expose me and send them to my baby daddy. We broke up 2 weeks before the controversy, and that being the controversy kind of surrounding what was happening around Cassie's lawsuit. So still kind of the winter time of 2023, where Jane also said that she was kind of heavily on drugs while these recordings were being recorded on. And she was kind of relaying to Christina Coram, I'm sure we're just both emotionally drained right now. And so those were just some of the messages that we saw between Christina Coram and Jane, as well as Christina Coram and even Cassie, too. And so really they just kind of span from all over the place and all over these particular dates, spanning from as early as, 2018 to as late as 2024.
What about drugs? We remember drugs are a big part of this case. Prosecutors assert that Sean Combs used drugs to keep victims or alleged victims compliant. We know that drug trafficking offenses are some of the underlying crimes for racketeering. I mean, prosecutors need to prove for racketeering at least 2 underlying predicate crimes. There could be, possession with intent to distribute, but there's also forced labor, kidnapping, arson, bribery. Talk to us about what the messages reveal about drugs. I think there was one in specifically between Coram and Combs that I think caught my eye.
So we did see a few messages about kind of the drug deals and just kind of all that it entailed as far as just kind of their method in terms of just getting or obtaining these drugs allegedly. So we saw one text exhibit from July 23rd of 2022. These were text and audio messages between Christina Coram and Diddy. And so we hear one audio message from Diddy saying, hey, can you see about the hotel room and get the same room? Christina Coram responds in a message, yeah, working on it. London sold out, presuming that they mean the London hotel, a hotel that that Diddy frequented a lot. Then we hear an audio message from Diddy saying, I need $10,000. Then Christina Coram responds, okay. There's kind of a gap in time between the next message where Christina Coram wrote to Diddy, Guido outside. And if you remember Guido from Jane's testimony, Jane had testified that Guido specifically was somebody that they would use to obtain drugs. And so then there's an audio message from Diddy where he said, can you let Guido in and take care of what needs to be taken care of? Christina Coram responds to Diddy saying, yeah, it's been handled. Then we see other messages. This one from the following year, April 14th of 2023. These ones between Fahim to Diddy, as well as Robin Greenhill and Christina Coram. And Fahim was Diddy's, he worked in Diddy's security, but also was someone who drove Diddy around too, where Fahim wrote $1,200 on flour. And on flour, they don't mean flowers like roses or sunflowers, tulips, none of that. They mean flour as in terms of marijuana, aka weed. And then there was another message that was $1,500 on Guido. Not Christina Coram. Diddy responds, no, hold up. And so I think there was just like kind of a conversation that was had just about the amount of money that was spent, because he always has to sign off on the amount of money that is spent or that his assistants kind of use or pay these drug dealers in order to get drugs allegedly for him. And so then there was another message going back in time a little bit here from November 24th of 2022 is a message from Christina Coram to Diddy Fahim where Christina Coram wrote, Puff, can you text Fa being Fahim, what you need to pick up before his flight to Miami, please? And Diddy responds, I told you. And then the text message went so fast, but essentially he was asking just for Molly pills. And then we see another message from on April 20th of 2023 from Fahim to Diddy, where Fahim says, just gave $5,000 to Brendan for hotel. Diddy responds, okay. So those were just some of the messages that we saw in relation to drugs and just how much money was spent on drugs, but also just in terms of, if someone were to buy the drugs, then Diddy kind of reimburses it as soon as he checks off and approves how much was spent on whatever particular drug it was.
Look, these messages are really important evidence connecting Combs to the other players, a part of his organization, for racketeering purposes, sex trafficking purposes, transportation to engage in prostitution. I mean, even something like you mentioned before, where Jane had texted Christina Coram that Combs had threatened me about my sex tapes that he has on my 2 phones. That goes to the coercion element. It helps corroborate her testimony. So you could see why the prosecution wanted this summary witness. By the way, there was also text messages from D-Rock, right, his former security guard, and also Mia, an alleged victim in this case who claims that she had been his assistant, Sean Combs' assistant, and that he sexually assaulted her multiple times. What did the messages reveal about these 2 individuals?
she kind of revealed and testified that she thought that she was possibly being swayed in a particular direction, especially after Cassie's lawsuit was filed. And so we saw some messages from Damian Butler, who is D-Rock, who I really wish the government would have called him as a witness, but not sure kind of what had happened there. But we saw just some more text messages between D-Rock, Sean Combs, as well as Mia, all kind of in separate instances. So we saw one message, kind of the earliest, that being from November 18th of 2023, so just a couple days after Cassie's lawsuit was filed, and then just one day after it was settled, where D-Rock wrote to PD or Diddy, "I need to hear your voice, bro. Love you." And then Diddy responds, "Thank you for checking on me. Really appreciate you. Love you." Then D-Rock wrote to Diddy around Thanksgiving time of that year, "Happy Thanksgiving to you and your family. Love you, man. I'm here for you. I feel I need to see you and chill with you for a couple of days. I didn't want to be in your space and I haven't spoken to you." Diddy responds, Diddy and D-Rock then talk on the phone, because we're able to kind of see that in this particular summary chart. Then about a week later, from the Happy Thanksgiving text message, D-Rock reaches out to Mia and he speaks to her on the phone. And then D-Rock sends Diddy Mia's number around that same time frame. So then it kind of jumps a couple weeks, or a couple days for that matter, to December 5th of 2023, where D-Rock calls Diddy. Then he texts Mia saying that your boy said to call him. Your boy, meaning Sean Combs, aka Diddy. Then we kind of jump a little bit in time to February 2nd of 2024, where Diddy told D-Rock, "Call me king, call me important." And then D-Rock, because of all the D's right here, D-Rock calls Diddy and they speak on the phone for about 4 minutes and 57 seconds, according to this particular summary chart. And then D-Rock texted Mia, "Are you okay? I can't believe you didn't call me." Mia responds to D-Rock, "Sorry, I was scuba diving." Kind of something that she had testified to before, where she had said that she was kind of nervous as far as why D-Rock was reaching out to her. As much as she loves D-Rock as a best friend, a big bro type of thing, she was kind of wondering what these sudden messages were all about and why Diddy wanted to speak to her around this time frame. And so then Mia and D-Rock are kind of catching up on things like D-Rock's restaurant, Mia snowboarding, and just where she was kind of at this particular stage of her life and how she was building houses, those types of things. And then D-Rock told Mia, "Let me know if I can let me know how I can send you something." And so then a couple days later, on February 4th of 2024, it seemed like D-Rock and Diddy were kind of coordinating something a little bit to get Mia specifically on the phone, because D-Rock calls Mia, then D-Rock tells Diddy, "Hey bro, she hit me back. I'm trying to call her now." Then D-Rock sends Diddy a copy of Mia's text message. Then Diddy responds to D-Rock, "Let me know when you hear from her." Then we see on February 6th of 2024 that Diddy tried to call Mia multiple times. And if you go back to Mia's testimony, she said when she got these phone calls around this time frame that she kind of threw her phone away, because everything came back to her in terms of memory, in terms of just feeling that anxiety as she had whenever Diddy was her boss, according to her testimony. Then we see on February 7th of 2024, Diddy texted Mia, "Hey, I don't want to be blowing up your phone. Let me know when you get 10 minutes to talk. Just need my memory jogged on some things." And then later we see messages from Diddy to D-Rock, where he said, "I sent that message to Mia because I've been trying to reach her." And then it kind of really verified a little bit of Mia's feelings, just in terms of why D-Rock was reaching out to her around this particular time frame, and then just kind of how it coincided with D-Rock and Diddy speaking to one another either through text or through calls to get a hold of Mia. And then Mia was just kind of, out and about and those types of things. And then eventually Diddy wasn't able to get Mia on the line, and the two hadn't spoken since.
Goes to the idea of witness tampering, goes to the idea of obstruction, right? One of the underlying crimes of this racketeering criminal enterprise. The idea is, after Cassie comes forward with her allegations, we got to make sure Mia's on the same page about everything. I think that's what they're trying to say. And not that he just farmed it out to D-Rock, but he was intimately involved in these conversations and trying to make sure he could get in contact with Mia, because, again, what are her allegations? That she was a witness, but also that she claimed she was sexually assaulted by Sean Combs. So not great, not great. You can see the importance of these messages. You can see why messages like this, including from the alleged drugs and setting up the hotel rooms and the payment and the travel, and even something like from Jane, where she basically said in a message that she was concerned Sean Combs was going to release sex tapes of her. That goes to the coercion aspect of sex trafficking, force, fraud, or coercion, right? Worried about those tapes being released unless she does what he wants. How does the defense fight back against this? What did they do when they cross-examined this summary witness?
Yeah, that was kind of one of my big questions too, Jesse, because I'm like, when you're coming at people with, not coming at people, I should say, but when the government has all these exhibits and dates and text messages, and you're able to find these text exhibits through these text messages, and it seemed pretty concrete, but the defense was able to do what the defense does. And right off the bat, the cross-examination, by the way, was done by Tenny Garagos. And so the defense off the bat kind of brings up Cassie's legal filing, the way it was sent. Then they kind of get into the messages from D-Rock to Mia, where D-Rock had told Mia, he told me that he wants nothing from you, and that being he, Sean Combs, wants nothing from you, you being Mia. And then we see the message going back to February 2nd of 2024, where Mia told D-Rock that she was out of Skrilla money, and so that she had no money, that type of thing. And so what I think the defense was trying to imply was that D-Rock wasn't reaching out to Mia saying, let me know if you need something, because Diddy was making him say that or anything like that. I think what the defense was trying to imply, or at least kind of poke holes in, was that maybe Mia was having financial issues, and that D-Rock, because he was opening a new restaurant, because they are just such close friends, D-Rock and Mia, that he was just sending this money to her, not because of alleged witness tampering or anything like that, but because it was just kind of a big brother trying to help out a little sister type of thing. And so the defense brought up that D-Rock sent that message to Mia saying, if you need anything, let me know. And then we see some more messages from D-Rock to Diddy from February 7th of 2024, where where Diddy tells D-Rock, I tried to reach her. D-Rock says, that's the last text I got from her, and now the phone is not even ringing. So I think what the defense is trying to also say here is that after February 7th of 2024, they weren't able to get in touch with Mia anymore. And so then afterwards, Diddy just kind of stopped reaching out to her and trying to make it seem like it wasn't more than anything besides him just reaching out to her, as opposed to maybe something, a little bit more serious. And so then the defense really kind of also talked with this particular witness, that being Sinker, the paralegal specialist, that these messages were just from an 8-year period. And so these select messages that only spanned about 33 pages long were just that. They only spanned about 33 pages long. They're not showing the full context of every single message that was sent within this long time period. And so the defense was like, this chart starts on March 18th of 2016, but Ms. Courtroom has been working for many years prior to 2016. And so then the defense brings up that there's only one time in this particular summary chart, or the summary exhibit, where the name Clayton Howard is brought up. And this was an escort or entertainer that also used kind of the other name as Dave. And so there was only one mention in this particular summary chart about an escort. And then we see messages from Dave Shirley Assist to Christina Coram, where it says Clayton Howard needs access to the room. And again, pointing out that was only one of the few messages that really referred to an escort around this time frame. And so then we start to see kind of messages from August 18th of 2016. These were messages that weren't shown when the government was doing their direct examination. And they were from Anat Moore, who was explaining to Christina Coram that the story won't run, or the story will run tonight. And that being a story, I think it was from TMZ, just about Cassie and Diddy getting into a huge fight, and that they broke up, and that they were kind of spinning the story about a fight over a cell phone. And they said in this particular message, the only reason that this story is running is because there's a police report that was attached. And then again, this being around the 2018 time frame. And so the defense brought up, dates that weren't included in the summary chart. They bring up, messages sent between Christina Coram and Cassie, and that no messages were sent or received from the summer and the fall of 2018. And there were only a few messages that were shown from 2019 and 2020. And so then they start to get into some of the messages from Jane to Christina Coram, where on November 7th of 2021, Jane writes to her, "Sorry for the late text. I'm having a bad come down and just wanted to check on Puff." Then there's another message from later that month, being November 30th of 2021, where Jane wrote to Christina Coram, "Hey babe, trying to get a hold of Sean. If he wants, he can drop it off at my building." And then the defense also bringing up that one of the texts implies that coordinating a hotel was also just between Christina Coram and Jane. And I think kind of going back to their argument while Jane was testifying is that Jane also kind of helped set up these particular room decor as far as these hotel nights. So they showed one of the defense exhibits, or I think it might have been a government exhibit, but one of the exhibits that showed just the hotel decoration, and that it was decorated with balloons and roses, and it kind of looked like a romantic gesture as opposed to, a freak-off or a hotel night, or what we think that might look like. And so the defense was really just kind of poking holes in what the jury wasn't able to see with that particular summary chart, as opposed to the select messages that the government just wanted to put on the summary chart.
Yeah, emphasizing things like Jane saying, I'm excited to surprise him. The idea that she was a willing participant in all of these sexual activities. And then anytime they try to show that Sean Combs didn't want these videos getting out, or making sure they don't get out, that goes to the idea of, was he really going to release these videos as a form of a threat? Really? Was it a real threat? So I see what they were trying to do, pick out some of the messages that might be beneficial. From there, though, we move on. And we got another witness, another summary witness, Special Agent Deliasa Penland. I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the special agent's name. I believe of the U.S. Attorney's Office from the Southern District of New York. Again, a summary witness. What was her role?
Yeah, so her role, and I think it's Delissa, kind of similar to Alyssa, because I think that was what went through my mind whenever she was saying and spelling her name. I was like, what did she say? But yes, Delissa Penland, she works for the U.S. Attorney's Office, and she's a special agent for the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Southern District of New York. And so normally her job is conducting search warrants, analyzing data, but in this case, what she did was just review charts for accuracy. Today was a very chart-heavy day. I was wondering at times how many more charts. It kind of feels like you're back in school a little bit. You're just seeing chart after chart, graphic after graphic. That's what today pretty much felt like. But she also reviewed video in this case too. And so right off the bat, she kind of had some interesting things in terms of just flights and hotel stays and how they kind of corresponded with one another. So what we were able to see in this particular summary chart was just dates, location, reservation, and the reservation name for a specific hotel. We also saw kind of the names attached to it in terms of just who was all kind of in talks to come out during this specific time frame, in terms of Cassie, Diddy, and then other entertainers or escorts too. And then we saw the flight records. So for example, we saw one particular summary chart, or one particular row that was from August 7th of 2009, and kind of going back a little bit in time to August 10th of that same year. And so we see the location being in New York City, the reservation at the London Hotel, and we see these names being kind of associated with this particular time frame, being Sean Combs, Cassie Ventura, Jules Theodore, Julian Sapp, and Oracle. And so these were kind of the men, or the escorts, I should say, that were kind of in talks about possibly coming during this particular hotel night, or traveling to this particular destination, I should say. So what we ended up noting, or what we ended up seeing, it was that there were flight records attached specifically to Julian Sapp, aka LA Strip. That was what the name was of this particular man's phone. And so we were able to see that there were flight records attached from a flight from Los Angeles to New York City on August 7th of 2009, and then a return flight from JFK back, but this one not going to LAX, instead it's going to Las Vegas. And so all of these rows were kind of in chronological order, beginning from like earliest time frame to latest time frame. So we were able to see another flight record from December 11th of 2009 to December 13th of 2009. And this was a reservation at here in New York City for the London Hotel. It was between Cassie, Sean Combs, and Jules. Then we see flight records attached for Jules Theodore, aka Jules, for him to fly from LAX to JFK on December 11th of 2009, and for him to have a return flight from JFK to LAX on December 13th of 2009. And then same with Cassie, but her date range was a little bit longer. She flew from Miami to LaGuardia, which by the way is just the way better airport nowadays than JFK. Sorry about that. But then we saw these messages from these flight records from December 2nd of 2009 to December 15th of 2009, where her return flight was from JFK to Los Angeles. And then we see corresponding text messages, because in addition to just seeing the flight records, we were seeing kind of the corroborating text messages as far as the planning goes for this. So we saw messages between Jules and Diddy, these coming from Diddy's specific devices, from December 7th of 2009. And it's a message from Jules to Diddy where he says, "I will have to cancel some parties, but I still have some traveling alone issues. I'd have to bring bring her. Unsure kind of who her was in this particular message, but then Jules tells Diddy that he's available Friday or whatever, and whatever flight will work for him. And so then there's a flight itinerary sent after this particular message, so we're able to see this particular flight itinerary. So it's from Diddy to Tony Bias, and it's in the email format, and the record came from Combs Global, where the subject of this particular email was, hey, I need a flight booked at Friday at 3 p.m. or 4 p.m. from LA to New York City. Then the body of this particular email said, under Jules Theodore, ASAP. So again, with all of these corresponding flight records and hotel stays, there's always kind of more records as far as text messages, or in this case, emails that are sent too. So then Tony Bias sent an email back saying the check-in for this particular time frame was December 11th, and the checkout will be December 14th. And then there was kind of a break in between some of these messages, and then we kind of get into the American Express statements. And let me tell you, Jesse, these American Express statements were something. They were hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars just for just a good month or so.
All right, and what did these Amex messages reveal?
Well, that they spend a lot of money on flights and a lot of money just in general, more than probably my entire bank account is worth, but not for these particular flights. I just want to make sure people know I don't have $612.20, but that's how much the flight was that we saw in this particular American Express statement, and it was an American Airlines flight from Miami to LaGuardia, and this being December 1st of 2009. Then we see another flight for about $2,100, and that flight was booked under United Airways, that being for the week later, December 10th of 2009. Then we see another kind of expense where it's American Airlines flight for Jules Theodore, that being Jules for $875.20, that being on December 11th of 2009. And it seemed like there were exhibits that the government wanted to show that were just very select. So there were select charges from this American Express statement that the trial team had actually picked out. So what we're able to see was the charge on the American Express statement, the amount, the payment method, and the account holder. So for example, on December 10th of 2009, we saw a United Airlines flight for Cassie that was $2,000, $2,621.21. Then we saw one from earlier that month, that being for the London Hotel, and the booking for the London Hotel being $1,977.50. The account holder was under Sean Combs. The arrival for the meet up at the London Hotel was December 11th of 2009, and it departed from December 13th of 2009. So all kind of collecting together in terms of just when the messages were sent to either to Cassie to make sure her travel was arranged, or even to the particular escort that was sent, and then just the accompanying American Express the American Express statement too. And so we saw another one for December 24th of 2009, that $369,279 were just spent that month. And that is a lot of money that, of course, Diddy has, enough money to pay that off, but it's just a lot of money that was spent around that particular time frame. And so we saw more exhibits, that being the flight summary chart. So we saw one going up in time to October 13th of 2012 through October 14th of 2012, where the location was New York City at the hotel, the Trump Hotel and Tower here in New York City. The reservation name was under a Janet Clark. And then the names kind of associated with this particular booking were Sean Combs, Cassie the Punisher, and Clayton Howard, aka Dave. But the only flight record that we saw with that particular exhibit, or that particular row of the exhibit, was for Cassie. And so what I think they were trying to go at was just that, there were conversations that were had with these escorts, but then sometimes the corresponding, time frame of when this hotel was booked, or when the hotel stay actually happened, that sometimes it wouldn't be any escorts that were there, or anybody that was there beyond, Cassie or just Diddy too.
And again, the more they show this, the more it leads to a concrete example or examples of transportation to engage in prostitution, transporting alleged sex workers and victims for the purposes of sex work. Sex trafficking has an interstate travel component to it as well. And you're seeing it. I mean, we always wondered, the travel receipts, the cash, the credit card bills, this is going to be how you sell this concept to the jury. Now, more specifically, I understand the jury saw text messages from 2013 about Cassie, a hotel room, Freakoffs. What about 2013 stood out to you?
Yeah, so we did see more messages, and sometimes when they're showing a lot of these messages, I'm like, have we seen these before? Have we not seen these before? But I think we might have possibly seen these before, but I'm going to put a big emphasis on might. So we did see messages from January 9th of 2013 where Diddy is asking Cassie, are you horny? And Cassie responds, LOL, yeah. And then Diddy responds, want to celebrate Xmas or have a Freakoff tonight or Friday. Then we see messages just a couple days later, January 11th of 2013, where Cassie writes to Diddy, you gonna hit Jules, got then, but not until 11. And then Diddy responds, got him for 7 p.m. Then we see another exhibit that same day, January 11th of 2013, where Cassie is messaging Garen being kind of her booker that she used for Cowboys for Angels, which was the kind of service that they used in order to get the escorts or entertainers over to the hotels or their Freakoffs. And so we see messages that same day from Cassie to Garen, where Cassie writes to him, hey, how are you? Do you have been in LA tonight? Garen writes, hello, honey. What time are you thinking? Then we see another message between Cassie and then Johnny LA Strip. That was his name in the phone message that we saw, where Cassie writes to him, you free, L'Hermitage Hotel. And then Johnny writes, okay, on my way. Cassie writes, actually, we don't need you anymore. She said a couple more things, and I think they were trying to coordinate more, but then all these texts were going by too fast. But then we saw an exhibit, and that being a travel invoice for Bad Boy Entertainment, and that being the same time, or excuse me, not the same time, but the same year, but October 19th of 2013, it was a flight for Cassie. Then we see messages between Cassie and Diddy, October 21st of 2013, where Diddy said, call up. Cassie says, he's avail. You didn't film anything on your phone, RT. Diddy said, no way. And then Cassie wrote, LOL, okay, cool. And then I will say, Jesse, one other thing that the jury was able to see is in these summary charts, there were also video files too. So what they ended up doing was kind of similar to what they did when they showed the sexually explicit videos when Cassie was testifying, as well as when Jane was testifying, where they shut off the big kind of exhibit that we in the gallery are able to see. All the jurors and both parties were assigned headphones to wear, but we do kind of know that they were these kind of sexually explicit or freak-off videos that featured Cassie, probably an escort, and then Diddy too, because, when we kind of know in terms of just where the line of questioning was going in terms of the escorts that were used, the video files that accompanied these particular summary charts. And so the jury was able to see, because I think what the defense's argument was, not that we've gotten to the cross-examination or anything, is like, how do we know that these flights actually connected with an escort or a freak-off actually occurring in a hotel room? But I think what the government did, and I think what they did kind of excellently here, is really kind of correspond these particular videos with the flights, with the escorts coming in, and then they showed the jury these videos again. But I will say, Jesse, because I know you want to ask what the jury's reaction was, and this jury is very professional. I will say that because, I sometimes blush when I'm sitting inside the gallery in terms of just some of these very sexually explicit kind of conversations that are had, the text messages that are read out loud. But for the jury, they really just do not bat an eye. They kind of watch what's on the screens right in front of them. They don't fluster. They don't look away from it or anything like that. They really are just very professional as far as seeing really the sexually explicit stuff, especially these freak-off videos.
Well, I'll tell you this much. I can't predict what the jury's thinking, and I can't know exactly what the jury's, what their reactions are. But what I can say is, to me, this seems like the most digestible day of testimony for the jury. This, to me, feels like the most easy, the way for the prosecution to tie it all together for the various charges. And obviously, they're going to do this in a closing argument. But to provide what is meticulous data, meticulous information, but in a clear timeline and connect it the way that you did, the jurors might be getting a sense of how this might be the prostitution charge, how this might be evidence of sex trafficking or corroborate the testimony about that, and more specifically, racketeering, connecting all this. And I have an understanding, right, Elizabeth, that they might be calling another summary witness. Aren't they about to call Brendan Paul, too, whose name has come up quite a bit? I mean, you think the prosecution's going to rest their case this week?
Yeah, it seems like the government is kind of leaning towards that way, and they could do it as soon as Wednesday, that being before the holiday that we all have on Thursday, that being June 19th, of course. So what we do know is that Delissa Penland is still on the stand. She'll finish up her direct examination, then the cross will happen, but then we'll finally hear from Brendan Paul, and I'm kind of wondering how his testimony will be, Jesse, especially because I'm like, he's one of the last witnesses that will be called outside of the summary witnesses, right? But will he be kind of that bombshell witness, especially as he's one of the last to kind of wrap up the case for the prosecution? But we should learn by tomorrow when he does eventually take the witness stand.
And by the way, Elizabeth, I was going to let you go, but I can't just yet because I understand we got our first clue as to who the defense is going to call, right?
So we did finally get to see a little bit of what the defense has up their sleeve when they eventually take over and they start their case. So what we do know is that Vashta Dunlap, who worked for Bad Boy Entertainment, I believe she worked in HR, will be taking the stand. So it'll be interesting to hear what she has to say, especially as she is being called as a defense witness. You would think that possibly she would be a government witness in this case, but nope, it seems like she's going to be one of the first witnesses brought out by the defense. And we learned that they're also going to have another kind of summary type witness. Tenny Garagos was very clear about not calling this particular person a summary witness, but they'll pretty much kind of be countering a little bit of just some of the exhibits that the government already has and really kind of talking about them probably in terms of what wasn't talked about during the government's case. And then we know that there will be also another person named Steven, wasn't able to get their last name, will also be testifying. So that's 3 witnesses right off the bat that the defense is ready to call once they take the case.
Yeah, and that witness, maybe the head of HR, really important. I think probably what were the job descriptions of Sean Combs' assistants and bodyguards, and was this exactly forced labor? What were they expected to do? I think really trying to hit upon that racketeering charge, that they weren't hired to commit crimes and cover them up. That wasn't their job description. There wasn't an overt agreement that they were going to do that. So I can kind of see where they're going, but we'll see ourselves. I don't know. What I do know is Elizabeth Milner just did another great day of reporting, and we're so lucky to have her. Elizabeth, thank you so much. I will speak to you tomorrow.
All right.
Thanks, Jesse.
And that's all we have for you right now here on Sidebar, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. And as always, please subscribe on YouTube.
I'm waiting to see somebody take the stand and try to defend Diddy. I haven't seen that yet. You know, I think everybody who took the stand is kind of like telling their side of the story, which is more against Diddy. I'm thinking, man, Paul coming up too? Oh my gracious, man. Y'all let me know what y'all think. I'm gonna get on up out of here. Y'all take it light, take it slow. Tell them Uncle Mike told you so. Peace out.